Okay.
All right, Parisa, what are we going to do today?
Okay, so since tomorrow's the first day of spring equinox, and today is that kind of zodiac cycle ending, I thought if we could talk about Marca. Am I pronouncing that right? Marca houses and planets?
Marca.
Marca. So yeah, about death, accidents, ill health, poverty, misery, so we can leave it all behind us.
All right, great. I like to talk about
Yeah.
things. Let's do it.
Okay. Yes. Okay, so I wanted to ask you if you can actually translate the word for us, because I've seen it as the killer, death causing, misfortune causing. So what is the actual Sanskrit translation of the word?
For Marca?
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. It's just Mara means death.
Okay.
Ka is probably short for Karaka or some, Marca, some means like the doer, the maker of death. So killer is a good one.
Killer
But
is a good one.
yeah, but see, it doesn't, in astrology and when you work with symbols, like let's say you do tarot, just simple thing, like if you get a tarot card and you have a death tarot card in your hand, does it mean you're going to die? It doesn't literally mean death, although the card itself literally means death. But you always have to realize that when you talk about symbol, the symbol is always going to be exaggerated.
Okay.
Because it has to blend, and then you have to blend that symbol in with the other cards and the other context and the other stuff that's going on to get the interpretation that's not exaggerated. So a second lord, seventh lord, they're killers, right? They're margas. That's what the symbol is. That doesn't mean that I have the second lord in my first house, I'm going to die.
Okay.
Well, yeah, you are going to die, but we don't.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that you died yesterday just because you have the second lord in the first house or something.
Okay. And before getting into the actual questions related to the indicators of it in a chart, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions just to put it into context.
Okay.
And maybe it moves a little bit beyond the realm of astrology. But I had two questions, one regarding death itself, and then the other one about karma. So the one about death, I wanted to see, how do you define death in general, in your opinion? And do you distinguish the difference between dying and death? Because I feel like I can experience myself dying, but this flesh being that I am won't experience its own death. And we're so worried about our death. So just wanted to see how you
that's interesting. Well, I define death, it's like, astrologically speaking, it's symbolized by the sunset.
Sunset.
So if you think about the sunset, you can understand a lot about death, and then birth is the sunrise. Okay. So when the sun sets, it dies. But nobody thinks that, oh my God, we're going to freeze, or, the world is over. Everybody knows that the sun still exists. It's just not in our world right now.
Right.
It's someplace else right now that we can't access, and it's going to come back.
Okay.
So that's what death literally is, the end.
Okay.
But the thing is that nothing ends or begins.
Right.
Things just change. Okay. So that's what death is. It's just the end of one state. Yeah. There's all different kinds of scopes of death too. There's deaths that happen all the time. There's 4 kinds of destruction discussed in the Puranas. One is just molecular destruction that's happening all the time. Yes. There's constant death going on. And the other is the death of individuals, death of individual things like objects that have been created when your TV stops working. That's a type of a death for that object. When your body stops working, that's a type of a death for that object. Then there's like deaths on a big scale, like, the Mesolithic era or whatever. Like, and then that, I don't know, there's probably no such thing as a Mesolithic era. You're an anthropologist. But like, what's it, like a Jurassic era or something? And then you get that asteroid or something, and then it's boom, that era is done. That's like a huge type of a death that they talk about in Puranas, where like there's deaths of entire huge things all at once. And then there's this final death of the whole universe,
Right.
which is when Brahma dies, which is, it lasts for 311 trillion years. But even that is just a sunset. It just goes out. It just goes out of its manifest state.
Okay.
And it rejuvenates for a while, recuperates, and then it comes back into its manifest state again. So that's what
So
death.
it's not as grim as we usually think of death to be. It's just a cycle.
Well, you think that death is grim when you only care about the way that things are manifest. If you just care about the way that things are manifest, then death is the end.
Yes.
Because it's the end. When I die, it's the end. This is finished. There's going to be no more Victicera ever.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if I really have 100% of myself invested into being Victicera, then that's very grim.
Right. Okay.
But if I have some contact with a different self that's not just Victicera, just not just the thing that's manifest right now, then it's not so grim if that thing that's manifest right now ends.
Okay.
Because that's not the entirety of me.
Yes. Understand. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. And then, as an extension to this question, but kind of moves far away from it, is that I've heard you, amongst others, say that one is considered time of birth is when one takes that first breath on their own, of their own effort. So the time of death, how is that determined? Because not everyone exhales, and the body takes many days, even up to 40 days to decay. So on a cellular level, it's still alive. So when is that determined as to looking at someone's chart, and that's trying to see what determines their death? How do we figure
What's
that
the
one out?
moment of death? How do you define the moment of death? Yeah, right. I think there's a lot of articles in like Scientific American and things like that. It's difficult to define because the thing is, basically, we usually just walk around day to day thinking that this face and body and hand and arms and stuff is me, and it's mine. But there's actually like a whole universe of creatures existing in our body. And they're all they don't even really know that we exist. They're just like we don't really know what huge purpose we're serving on some geologic time scale. The creatures that exist in our body don't even really know how they're moving our hand. They're just kind of doing their thing, eating the food that they want to eat and stuff, and somehow it's moving our arm. But so we're like the king in the city of a body. And there's tons of subjects that are doing their own thing, basically, but serving us, but not even knowing it. And when the king leaves the city takes some time to decay.
Yes.
It falls apart. It will fall apart. It's destined to fall apart, but it doesn't just go lights out.
Right.
And sometimes some cities can last longer than others without a king. This is it's not really, you can't say, 3 days after you stop breathing, then the body stops having its functions. Different people will have different creatures with their own different longevities on microscopic time scales. But basically, when the king leaves the body, that's the death. It initiates the shutdown process. And so the king is the main consciousness that's operating the body. And how would you know when that happens?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think you would have cessation of breath.
The last breath.
Yeah. Because the life starts with the first breath, because breath is where the prana can move in and out, and prana is what connects the actual subtle version of the creature, the mind and the feelings and the emotions, the thoughts. The breath is what connects that to the physical apparatus of the body.
Okay.
So the connection starts when you start breathing, and it stops when you stop breathing. But you still have, it's not like, you stop breathing, now you're totally disconnected from the body. It's like Velcro, you have to like disentangle from it. That's why there's Pitri or Yamadutas. They help you get all those webs and the tangle. Like if you try to move your television from upstairs to downstairs, you got to like unplug 55 different things. It's not so easy.
No.
You just pick it up and move. So same way, you can't just pick your mind up out of one body and throw it into another. There's a lot of cords that you have to disconnect and things that you have to sever and sort out and unwired. Some people have a really hard time disconnecting from the thing. They'll resist the disconnection, and then the pitchers will get a little aggressive with them and start pulling them to disconnect the wires. But other people are more willing to just, disconnect me, I'm ready to go.
Yes.
And the pitchers are more friendly with them.
Yes. This is what you're describing right now is kind of the kind of process we have to go in our life too, which is related to this concept we're discussing. Because sometimes you're going through a struggle, you just have to disconnect from certain things, right? And and move on.
Because we experience death all the time. The death is on different levels. It's not death is not just of the death of your body, but anytime a relationship ends, that's a death. Anytime a computer breaks, it's a death. Anytime anything breaks, right? Death is just the end of something. So anytime something breaks and stops working, that's a death. So now you have to decide if you're going to willingly detach yourself from it or have a hard time getting detached from it.
Okay. Yeah. And the next question, I wanted to tie this to the notion of karma. And because, for example, yesterday in the Nakshatra course, you were saying that astrology was used as a way to tell time, right?
Yeah.
And then our karma is supposed to be those actions and reactions within the context of that time, the motion within that time as actions. And to say that someone's going to die in a certain way, or that they're going to die young, or they're going to die old, is that related to one's karma?
Everything is related to karma.
Everything's related to karma.
Buddha Udbhava Karo Karma. That's your definition of karma. Buddha Bhava Karo Karma. Karma is the cause of the causes of the thing that makes things. That's the definition of karma that Krishna gives in the Gita. So everything that gets generated, every Bhuta means a thing that's been made. Everything that gets generated is generated by a generator, and the ultimate generator is karma, the action that initiated something. So there's nothing that exists that's not karma, except for the doer of the karma. The doer of the karma is the consciousness. The conscious entity is not a product of karma. Right? Karma is a product of the conscious entity. The conscious entity wants to act, wants to do things. So the conscious entity generates karma. But besides the conscious entity, there's nothing else that's not karma. Everything else is karma.
Okay.
So death is karma, birth is karma, marriage is karma, separation is karma, everything is karma.
So would it be fair to say that our expiration date is preset?
Your expiration date is preset, but the future doesn't exist, the past doesn't exist. It's so it's not preset like it's preset, but it's not like stone set.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's preset that you have X amount of vitality.
I see.
How far can that get you depends on a lot of things. Depends on how because the conscious entity always continues to act, even though the conscious entity does one thing, right? And then that sets up some effect. A person does something, it sets up an effect. So now they have a destiny as a result of what they did, but then they're going to do something again.
Right.
So it's very complicated. This first action sets something in motion this way, but then the second action would set it this way, but then the combined action makes it go a little like this. And then there's another combination of another way somebody acts is a little differently, sends it in a different. So it's really complicated how the future gets manifest because the conscious being is constantly acting. So you get in this life, when you get born, you're getting like a whole new deck of cards, or you're getting like a whole new board game. And this is here you go. This is what you're going to play with in this life.
Okay.
But then you're still the player, and how you move your pieces and the strategies that you use depends on how well you do with the stuff that you're given at the outset. Okay. So like death, for example, everyone's given a certain vitality, and so you have like a basic life expectancy.
Okay.
But whether
So,
what you choose to do in your life will also affect what you can get out of that karma.
okay. So it's like that video game where your life is kind of shrinking, but depending on what you do, then you can expand that life?
Yeah, like if there was a video game where you're, yeah, there's a lot of video games like this where you have a certain amount of time to do something,
Yes.
but there's also little clocks that you can find that increase your time again. So
Right.
it's something like that. Like you're born with a certain amount of time, but how are you living your life will determine whether that time gets shrunk or expanded. But it's not going to expand past. If you're born with a vitality for like 6 years, like God forbid,
Yes.
then it's not likely that you can live to be 120 years old. How would you be able to live to be 120? But you could maybe stretch it to like 30 or 36 or something. Like a person with a real terrible illness, if they really work hard, they could live for about 30, 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
there's play within a boundary.
Okay. So how do some astrologers claim that they can tell someone's time of death if this is something that a human being has within their will to do by how they live? So maybe they'll live longer than what they might see, no?
Well, don't be naive, right?
Yes.
Don't be naive about the world. People say things. They may even believe what they say because they may have a huge ego. And right, they may think I can tell you the time that you're going to die and I won't be wrong. They might even believe that, or they may not believe it, and they may be a salesman. They don't be naive. It's not that everybody is telling you the honest truth.
Yes.
But somebody who's telling you the honest truth would say, I could tell you what I can tell you. Do you want to know how long you're going to live? I'm an astrologer. I can tell you what it looks like from your chart. That's what I can tell you. I can tell you what I can tell you. There is some information I can find about how long you're going to live, but I can't tell you the day that you're going to die. If you want to
Can
find,
one tell?
no, you can't.
You can't. Okay. Right.
Well, the most famous people, the most famous prophets and all those guys, they're also not accurate. How many, right? How many times has Nostradamus' prediction gone wrong?
Very true.
So many times.
Yes.
And they're also hedging too. They're also like wording their things in such cryptic ways that they get multiple chances to be right, and still it goes wrong.
Right.
So a lot of it is just advertising. Okay. I can tell you this, I can tell you that. You can know. Theoretically, you can tell a person when they're going to die. But you would have to have the mind of Brahma to really be able to get it to like 90%, 95% accuracy, 95% assurance.
Yes.
A normal human is like a good astrologer reading a birth chart would, honestly speaking, without any advertising, sales pitch or anything like that, would probably be about 60%, 70% in the ballpark.
Yes. Okay.
And with some people, it's easier than with others, because with some people don't do anything special. They don't think, they don't exert much not every human exerts the same amount of conscious will. A lot of humans are just living on autopilot. They're not living like humans, especially maybe this day and age. Most people aren't living like humans. They're just living like fancy animals. So they're just going with their instincts and feelings. So they would be easier to predict.
I see.
Because they're just following the momentum. They're not making any efforts. But if you have a human being that's actually making conscious efforts to be proactive in their life, it's much more difficult to predict from their karma what's going to happen.
I see. Okay. Thank you for explaining this.
Thank you.
And now if we can move more into the specifics.
Sure.
The planetary indicators. So correct me if I'm wrong, I had to do research on this, and there's so many different explanations everywhere that I'm not even sure if I'm going to be regurgitating the right thing. But from what I've learned so far, the most common planetary indicators for these Marca positionings are Mars, Saturn, the nodes, and sometimes Mercury, and always Venus. And I wanted to know specifically with Venus, is a benefic. Why would Venus be causing hardship or death?
Yeah, all right. Let me say first that
Yes.
effort to be able to predict someone's death
Yes.
has been number one on the priority list of astrologers since astrology has been recorded. Since if no matter how far back you get a source material and you read, like from an astrologer, you get an astrologer's diary or journal or notes. No matter how far back you go, you always find them making systems for how to predict a person's death and trying to figure out how to make it better and how to make it more accurate. It's been the holy grail of astrology since the beginning. So that shows you it's not simple, it's not easy, because there's no leeway here either. It's not like, yeah, I think I died. Maybe you're right, maybe I died. It's just like you either died or you didn't die. And then also, but you have to take into account that, see, if you think about what it is, it might give you a little more hope on being able to predict it. Maybe the person may avert the death or something. So you might not get a death at that time that you predicted, but you should get something. You should get something like a danger, an illness. Something should have come towards death at the time that you're predicting death. Now, as for the Marcas, I'm surprised you didn't mention the second lord and the seventh lord. You only mentioned planets by name.
I was going to go to the houses and then the lordship and then the divisional charts too.
All right. All right. So as far as planets by name, why Venus, right?
Well, it's a benefic.
It's a benefic. It would be the same thing as the eighth house. The eighth house is the Ayush Bhava. Yes. It's the house of longevity. But it's very important in understanding the death of a person, because that's what you want to know. When does my Ayu, my life force, run out? So if you want to know when the Ayu, the life force, runs out, you want to look at the house of Ayu, the eighth house. So people think, oh, the eighth house is the house of death. It's the house of life, reproduction. It generates life. But it's that because it's the house of generating the life, it's very important for understanding when you're going to die. When are you going to run out of life energy? Same thing with Venus. Venus is the progenitor. It's the generator. She's the fertility indicator. So she's got the Ayush. She's got Shukra. She's got the fuel. Shukra means fuel. In the Nakshatra Sutra class, the next class, we'll look at Kritika's Sutra. And it uses the word Shukra, meaning fuel. So Venus has got the fuel, the life force, the longevity. So you will look to Venus too to see, do I have tons of fuel? Do I have a little bit of fuel? How much fuel do I have for my life force?
Okay, I understand. Let me just look at this question here. And then I also had that in my research, the Sun, Moon, and Jupiter are exempt because of their functional benefics. So what if they're not in good dignity or they're not strong in a chart? Could they also come to indicate?
I mean, so I'm trying to follow what you've said so far. So what you've said so far is like, you've named every planet almost.
Yes.
So wherever you're picking up this stuff from, it seems kind of useless, because what's the system? Your system so far is that any planet can cause death. So that hasn't helped me. I'm no further along than when I started out not knowing what planet can cause death, because now you've just told me that any planet can cause death, unless they're a functional benefic, means unless they're good.
Unless if they're good.
Functional benefic is just a very confusing term for meaning they're the lord of good houses.
Okay.
So basically it means unless they're good, they can cause death. All right, fine. So that's a very simple principle then. Planets that are bad can cause death.
Okay. Now to put this maybe Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, well, let me
No,
just qualify that.
yeah.
It's maybe bad by nature, like a Saturn or a Mars, or maybe bad by condition, like an undignified planet or a functional malefic, a planet that owns difficult houses.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
No, sorry. I was going to say maybe it'll make more sense in the context of the lordship, like the way you said at the beginning. So I got the primary determinants of death, Lord of the second and the seventh house, when they have malefics in these. And then the secondary determinant of death, Lord of the second and the seventh house, or the Lord of the third and the eighth house, or the Lord of the third or eighth associated to the Lord of the second and the seventh. So these are common placements maybe in a chart. So we can't always say that this is the indicators of death, could we?
Well, everybody dies.
Hardship, it does.
Right? Everybody dies, so you better have a common
Yes.
indicator of death. Everybody needs to have an indicator of death.
Yes.
All right, so what did you actually say now? There were so many conditions that even I
know.
it wasn't really fun. So the Lord of the second or the Lord of the seventh, they can cause death.
If they have a malefic planet in these houses.
Only if there's a malefic planet in the second or seventh house?
This was a primary determinant.
Really? Where did you get this?
I think this one was actually Wikipedia.
Oh, really? See,
Yeah.
that's the other thing. Now, if you're searching for the Holy Grail,
Yes.
you're going to go on a wild goose chase.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody's searching for the Holy Grail.
Yes.
So if you're going to try to tackle some subject like how do you predict the death of a person, then get organized with the research.
Yes.
Try to find a great astrologer, meaning, like a classically great astrologer. So, and you can do this with Western astrologers or Indian astrologers. Like try to find a Varaha Mihira, see what he says about how you predict death. Or I'm not so up with the Western astrologers' names, like historically great ones. Vedic Valens or something, one of those type of people. We have the books that they've written still from centuries and centuries ago.
Okay.
And they've, over the centuries, these people are still considered great astrologers. Go see what they say about how you predict death. Then you will at least cut out the noise of everybody on a wild goose chase to try to figure this out. So everybody's got their opinions about how it's done.
Okay.
Basically, what I would say is just basically the second lord or the seventh lord is a death giver, a Marca, because the second house is opposite from the eighth, and the seventh is opposite from the first. And the first house is your birth, and the eighth house is your lifespan, your life force. So the opposite to birth is death, and opposite to life force is lack of life force. That's why these guys, and it's not the houses, although the seventh house does also represent death, but the second house doesn't. It's not the houses that are the causers of death, it's the lords of the houses.
The lords of the houses, okay. So let's say we have sun that's debilitated in the seventh house because that's where the sun sets and things disappear, right? Let's say someone has that. I mean, can we attach this Marca denotation to that positioning or no? We have to look at.
If you got a debilitated sun, then it's quite likely. The debilitated sun by itself indicates weak health. So if you have a debilitated sun in your chart, it's likely that you have bad health. So if you have bad health, then your lifespan is shorter than if you have good health. Well, not necessarily, but probably, right?
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be a Marca to contribute to determine. This is the thing about lifespan. If you're going to calculate lifespan, there's a billion things you're going to have to put into the calculation.
Yes.
And what the second and seventh lord Marca thing is all about, don't take it all over the place either. You got to also compartmentalize your symbolisms. It's not just that, okay, the second lord is a Marca, it's a death giver, so the second lord is bad. The second lord's not bad. The second lord is a good lord. Yes. You put the second lord in the fourth house, you get a really great effect, right? The second lord can do really great things. Second lord in the 11th house. Second lord's not bad. It's just a Marca for a specific technique. And what's the technique, right? And this technique involves transits. We're trying to predict the date of death, So we're not going to do it by just looking at the birth chart. We're going to have to look at a dasha system or a transit system or a progression system or some kind of chronological system.
Yes.
So this one is particularly meant for transits.
I
So
see.
when you're seeing transits to the Marcas,
Yes.
then you got difficult period, you got windows open. This is the other thing about how the future works. It's like, here's a window where this could happen.
Mm-hmm.
There's a window of this effect. This cause might produce this effect in this window of time. It might not. If it doesn't produce it in that window of time, it's still got the effect. It still is holding this fruit that it's got to deliver. We couldn't get it through the window at this time because something got in the way. Some other thing got through the window first. It's that complicated. And the future is that complicated. So if this window opens up and this death couldn't be delivered through that window in that time, then it's still holding the death. The next time it gets a window, it's going to try again.
Oh, I see.
So what you can see by looking at transits to Marcas, or maybe even from Marcas, or especially if you're getting to and from at the same time,
Okay.
like a Marca planet's being transited by a significant...
Sorry.
No problem. You know what they call that in Japan? Whether you put your phone on like a silence mode, they call it manner mode in Japan.
Say it again.
Manner mode. You have good manners. Please have good manners. Put it on manner mode.
I usually do. I forgot today.
And they're really obsessed with, in Japan, they're obsessed with manners. So like you're not allowed to talk on your phone on the train.
That's
And
nice.
if your phone goes off on the train, everybody looks at you like, where are your manners?
Oh.
They
It's
put the
actually
phone
good
on.
though.
Yeah, it's great. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, I drive down here sometimes and people are crossing the road with talking about Marca. They're just asking for their own death.
Yeah.
Like, really trust a stranger that much behind the wheel? What if I hit you? They're not even looking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have signs up all over Japan now. It says, don't text while walking.
Don't what?
Text
Text. Makes sense.
while walking.
Yes.
Because they are obsessed with gadgets and stuff, and they are constantly on their phones. When you go into the train in Japan, they're just all sitting down looking at their phones. But they're all on manner mode.
Yes. That's good.
So, right, Marcas will, if you have a transit to a Marca by a substantial planet, meaning like transits are substantial when they're from slow planets or stationed planets. So if you're a stationing planet or a slow planet like Saturn, Jupiter, maybe even like debilitated Jupiter, transiting to a Marca at the same time the Marca is transiting to something else, and that's like a window where deathly effects can be delivered. Maybe that window will shut before a deathly effect can be delivered because maybe there's too much ayu, maybe there's too much lifespan. So how the death couldn't get through the ayu to get through this window of possibility, so it has to wait for the next window to open up. And if at that time the conditions are right, there's the lifespan, the life force is weak enough, then it can get through. Maybe it can just push the life force down only. That's all it can do. Okay. You should see some effect when there's a window for a Marca, but it's obviously not always going to be death. You'll get a Marca transit when you're, in the prime of your life. You probably just get sick. Right. But then when you get older, as a person gets older, death gets more likely. It's just practically speaking, you're more likely to predict a death accurately if you predict it in their 80s than if you predict it in their 40s, because most people die in their 80s. But it's not cheating. It's just because that's where the life force usually runs out. You have to see the life force run out before the Marca can make an effect.
Okay, makes sense.
So you have to also assess that, how much ayush they have.
Okay. And actually, while we're here, just going to divert very slightly. The Dasha system, for example, only runs up to 120 years. Is this the reason for it? Because of that sense of vitality that a human being can have, maximum would be around 120 years?
Yeah. I was doing a reading for an insurance salesman.
Yes.
And he told me, it's really weird. In insurance, we also consider the lifespan to be 120 years.
No way, really?
Yeah. He said it's because nobody lives to be 120 years, so we can never have to pay our full thing. Yeah, but according to this is a little bit strange because according to Puranas, you usually hear that the maximum lifespan is 100 years.
100, okay.
The human being in this epoch, the maximum lifespan is 100 years.
I see.
But astrology has the idea that the maximum lifespan is 120 years. I don't know where they got it from.
Okay.
And it's only the Vimshottari system. Vimshottari means 120. Literally, the word Vimsha means 20 and 20 above, 20 more than 100. Vimsha Uttara. Vimshata Uttara. 20 above 100 is 120. Then there's other systems, Ashtotari, 8 above 100, 108. You could consider life to last a maximum of 108 years.
Okay.
Or there's ones that are short, like 77, 64.
77.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's other dasha systems.
Okay.
But Vimshottari is popular.
Okay. Got it. Sorry if I'm diverging there for a second. But going back to the transits, for example, within the dasha system, it's been said that certain planets need to be activated in order to give their fruits, their results, whether if it's death or an award. I don't know. So let's say you have the transits, but that dasha system is not activated. Will the transits be able to deliver that death or reward, whatever it is that is going to do?
Great point. So it's going on the same principle as you want to see a double transit, right? Then you also want to see a confluence between dasha and transit. Okay. If the person is in a Marca Mahadasha and a Marga Bhukti, you know what I mean by that? The main dasha is Marca, and the portion of that, every dasha has its sub-portions.
Yes, the Antradasha, yes.
Yeah, the Antardasha, the Bhukti, the part of the dasha. If they're both Marcas, and then there's also a significant Marca transit, that's a pretty big window.
Yeah, huge.
That's a pretty big window of opportunity for whatever it is. Let's say, if you're predicting marriage instead of death, you look at the marriage factors and you say, look, they're in the dasha planet, Mahadasha planet, the Bhukti planet, then the smaller dasha planets, they all have to do with marriage. And there's a transit here that has to do with marriage also. That window for marriage is huge. It doesn't guarantee that the person is going to get married, but it sure does guarantee that they have a huge chance.
Okay.
Yeah, so same thing with death. That's same thing with any prediction. The only thing you can predict with a human brain, the only thing that you can predict is that here's the window of opportunity. And you can judge how big is this window of opportunity? How easy is it for an effect to get out through this window? I really don't think the human mind can do all of the variables that need to be juggled. Or at least the modern human mind can't do all of the variables that need to be juggled to say, all right, it's going to happen at this window, not that one for sure.
Okay.
Maybe 1 in a million every few centuries you can get a person that is that good at astrology that they can get that accurate most of the time.
Okay. So if only one is activated, so let's say I'm having a transit of not a good positioning happening, but that dasha is not, that planet is not, let's say Venus is not activated, can we say that this is still something that someone needs to take into consideration and worry about, or is this just like a passing event that might feel like a bump?
Yeah, well, you should worry about your bumps too, right?
Yes.
I would say this is something, when you see a big window for death,
yes,
they might not die, but it's a big window for death. You need to be worried about it. There can be dangers, there can be accidents, there can be significant illnesses.
I see.
Or instead of your body dying, you might lose something. You might actually experience a death rather than you yourself dying. We're talking about symbols, right? So we're reading karma through. Think about what astrology is. We're reading karma indirectly. We're not actually doing hard science with you can't do hard science with this because we can't observe the causes and the causes that have been done in previous lifetimes. So we're not like actually mapping out directly causes and effects. We're looking at symbolic things that are giving us clues and hints about the causes and effects that are going on.
Right.
So something that symbolizes death could symbolize something really close to death too. So, with the astrology, you just get in the ballpark of saying, here's the death symbol, and it's really potent at this time, at this particular time in your life. So that's the information that I can give you. Now, you might want me to be real specific about that. I might say, well, you might die then, or well, you might, or I might be more specific. I might figure it out more and say, well, I think your grandma's going to die then, or something. If you know the details, right? How old the person is at the time and what's going on with their other family members, and you can cut out the possibilities more easily and get to the possibilities that are more likely.
Okay.
But astrology is really all about possibilities, probabilities.
Right. Yes. This is why at the beginning I was asking if you can, how do you define and differentiate between death and dying? Because death seems to be that stamp of it's the end, but the dying part, like you're saying, like an illness could come. Like I could be diagnosed with cancer, but I'll overcome it, type of thing, right?
Right. So the Marcas can also introduce you to dying.
Okay.
You could experience death without dying. You might have your pet may die or something, or your friend may die, or a family member may die.
Yes. Okay. And I hope this is not too much of a big leap, but as far as the divisional charts go, which are the ones that we should really focus on to see misfortune and illness, death, things of that nature?
There's a really good technique. Now, it's not fresh in my mind because I haven't done a death reading in 5 years, maybe. There was a period of time when I did a couple of them in a row, and I really got kind of into it and researched the right techniques and everything, but I haven't done it in a long time, so I'm a little rusty. But there's certain techniques, and I can tell you as much as I can remember about them, that involve the subcharts. And these are reasonable, these are from good sources. You would count a certain number of navamshas. Like, you have to actually think of the navamshas as 9 divisions of each sign, not just as the chart where there's only 12 signs in a chart. So there's 108 navamshas total. You want to count 88 navamshas. I think it's 88, or it might be 64, from something, from either the person's ascendant or their moon. I can't remember the exact technique. But this is showing you like how they use the subcharts. That navamsha is represents the 8th house really strongly because it's like exactly the 8th house cusp.
I see. Okay.
So that navamsha, when that navamsha gets a transit, then that's really a big window of time for death. And then there's counting to the 8th house navamsha, the 8th house cusp navamsha, or you might just update it to a modern way of saying what navamsha is the 8th house cusp in.
Okay.
It's probably what they were trying to do anyway.
Okay.
That's when that navamsha, not that sign, but when that navamsha. And so now you can really narrow it down to a 3-degree segment of space. When that navamsha has the Marca in it, then it's a window for death.
I see. Okay. Okay.
That's one technique. Another technique was similar with a Draken.
That's 22?
Draken is the 3rd. You split each sign into 3.
Oh, 3, right. Yes. Okay.
And there was some technique that was quite similar. You count a certain number of Drakens, and when that Draken has a Marga's transit, then that's the time to die.
Okay.
And there's other things too, like there's other techniques where you check whether the sign is dual, fixed, or cardinal, right? Mm-hmm. There's some principle that fixed nakshatras, fixed signs give longevity.
Okay.
Cardinal ones, I think, I can't remember. Like I said, it's been years since somebody wanted me to tell them when they're going to die. Cardinal, I think, was low longevity, and dual was medium. And then you just start to consider, like, okay, what's the sign of the ascendant? What's the sign of the moon? Mm-hmm. How do these? Are they both cardinal? Then it means this sort of general range of life? Are they both fixed? Then it means that a much longer general range. And then within that, that's how you find the bigger window. Like here's the general range where death is actually likely instead of just some dying experience.
I see.
And then within that window, you look for the transits to those particular Navamshas or Drakons.
Okay.
And I found that they were reasonably successful techniques. Meaning the accuracy was about 70%, 60, 70%. One of the accuracies that was 100% was I had this woman, this was like maybe 7 years ago, a long time ago. I had this woman contact me for a reading. She wanted to know if her husband was going to die soon. She was scared that her husband was going to die soon. And so she gave me his birth information. And then I said, what did I say? I said, yes, it's very dangerous. You have to take care of, I didn't want to say he's going to die soon. I said, you have to make sure he's going to probably have internal bleeding in the abdomen. You have to be careful of this. Take it seriously, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then she said she was in an emotional state because actually her husband had just died.
Oh, wow.
And she was like some kind of a physicist or something. And for some reason she wanted to lash out at an astrologer. So she said, well, see, you're a quack. You didn't know that he already died. But actually, I kind of knew that this is so super dangerous. I consider that to be pretty accurate. Like I knew that this is the period of time that's really dangerous for this guy. And the way that he died actually was it was mountain climbing, and he fell and died of internal hemorrhage. So it was really quite accurate. If you ask me, if you ask her, I was totally off. But if you ask me, I was pretty impressed. So that was like one of the cases where there was another one where a client wanted me to know when her mother was going to die because she was like dealing with a lot of diseases, and the mother was dealing with a lot of diseases like this one. And this one was really difficult to get.
Okay.
Because if you think about it, this person's like, when you're dealing with like a lot of disease, and it's like you're constantly in this death experience, like the dying experience. This woman was constantly like on the verge of death for years. So your predictions are very difficult to make because it's like a huge window of death always happening for the person.
Yes.
So I kept predicting it, and then it would just be like a serious bout or something, and then she would rebound from it. And it actually took her years and years to die.
Wow.
And it was very difficult to get that one right. So you can't always be right. If the client has a misconception that you are God and you know, or you have a magic crystal ball, then I wouldn't go forward with that. I would say, look, I don't know for sure, but do you want me to tell you whatever I can tell you? And they already usually know that, They say, yeah, of course, I know that. I just want you to tell me what you can see. And then I'm just glad to tell them what I can see. But if they think that I can tell them, beyond a shadow of a doubt, when something's going to happen, I'll decline the reading. I'll say, look, you got to understand, I can't do that.
Yes. Makes sense. Okay. I don't want to leave out this axis. You talked about the first and the seventh axis, and then the second and the eighth. And then there's a lot of reference to 6 and 12. And I wanted to see your thoughts on that.
Well, I think 6 and 12 will put you into like the weakness zone.
The weakness zone, okay.
Right? Like, see what I was saying before is, if you predict that somebody's going to die when they're in the prime of their life, you're not that likely. Of course, maybe there's an accident, right?
Yes.
But usually you have like death usually happens in a period of weakness.
Mm-hmm.
For most people, you get they become sick, they become ill, they become weak, and then they die. So usually what you want to see from an astrological point of view is, where does this person get really ill and sick? And then within that window of time, where is the death likely? Okay. So from the 6th and the 12th house axis, you can see where they get really ill. It's that 6th and 12th is not necessarily death, but it's illness, stuff that supports and leads to death. Right. 6th house is supporting death, and 12th house is detracting from life. So they're both going in the same direction here, but they're not death itself. Death itself is actually the 7th house.
Okay.
It's like you said too, like but this death itself is just like a blink. It's really
Mhm.
the eighth house, which is really important because it's preventing the death. The sixth house is really important because it's supporting the death by giving illness. The eighth house is giving vitality to prevent death. So those are the issues. You look at those issues more, but the actual Marca, the actual death, comes from the seventh. So I think if you've encountered techniques for predicting death that involve the sixth and the 12th house, probably what they're going for is they're trying to narrow down where is the person ill,
Mhm.
because that has to be a factor that comes into get them ill first, get them weak first, then when a window for death opens up, it can actually come through and make an effect.
I see. Okay. Okay. I want to see if I can ask you one other question, which actually set all of this into motion for me to look into this. I was talking to a family member and they wanted to know, can you tell from a chart how I'm going to die? Because I really want to die in my sleep. So I wanted to know, can you tell if someone's going to die by accident? They're going to be decapitated, hung, sleep?
Yeah. Yeah, that's also been the holy grail of astrology since the beginning. People
Okay.
want to know, how am I going to die? People are very concerned with their death.
Mm.
And yeah, so therefore you'll find tons of techniques and tons of suggestions. And you look with the example that I gave you of the lady whose
Yeah.
husband died from falling. I knew that it would be from internal bleeding. I didn't know that it would be falling from heights, but after she said falling from heights, it made sense.
I see.
But
Okay.
it was clear enough to see that it would be internal bleeding. So you can
Okay.
tell the type of death too, not just the time.
I see.
And I can't remember. Like I said, it's been years since I actually worked on this topic.
Yes.
But I remember something like, I remember when I used to look at my chart sidereally, I
Mm-hmm.
used to think, oh, that looks like I have a pleasant death because I have Venus in my eighth house.
Yes.
Yeah. But now I have Mars in my eighth house. But I have Mars,
I have
Mercury.
Mars in a death house too, so
Yeah.
yes.
So, typically if you got Mars involved with the death, then you're thinking like the death happens by an accident or an injury, some kind of blood is involved. Blood will be spilled or something with Mars. And then if death happens with a planet like Jupiter or Venus, and you think it's pleasant, it's a peaceful death.
Okay.
Or you can also tell, like, I don't know if you can tell, but these are the theories in the systems, like where does the seventh house, the seventh lord go, can tell you something about the type of the death.
I
So
see.
the seventh lord in the sixth house, you probably get sick and die.
I see. Okay.
Seventh lord in the eighth house, it might come out more of all of the sudden thing.
Okay.
Because the eighth is secrets, where it just comes out of nowhere. Sixth and the seventh and the ninth, oh, it's probably an easy death. Maybe it's in the sleep or something.
Okay. Since we're on the grim tip, what about murder? Would that be the eighth house?
Yeah, well,
And then
but let me just say, like, don't just go look at your chart now and say, okay, I have this seven. I'm all set. I have the seventh lord in the ninth house. I'm going to die in my sleep, and then all of a sudden, when you get cancer or something, and you start cursing astrology, like, just realize that you haven't done your astrology yet. You're just looking at one thing. You got to look at this all through all the subcharts, everything. It takes a lot to make an astrological interpretation. I'm just telling you the ingredients of it.
yes.
Murder, Mars, really.
Mars. Okay.
Yeah, especially if it's murder by a knife or a blade or something.
I see. Okay.
Mars,
Okay.
maybe sixth house, going into the seventh house
I see.
would be
Okay.
like an enemy or a thief coming into the death area, causing the death, rather than the seventh going into the sixth if the sixth goes into the seventh.
Okay.
These are basic ingredients, principles, but you have to put them into a whole recipe. Like I said, this is the holy grail.
Yes.
Astrology has really been challenged to, can you tell when this person died and how this person died? And they've been trying to do it for 2,000 years or more. So there's many, many interesting systems, but none of them are entirely accurate. And that's because nothing is entirely accurate. You can't even predict the weather with entire accuracy because the future is not something that exists. It's only the present that exists. And the future gets changed by the actions that are happening in the present, not just the past. The past doesn't exist. The past is just a present that is having some effect. It's a former present that's having an effect on now. That's all the past is. So the future is not really set in stone. So therefore, there's no such thing as a crystal ball. Like, you can't actually see what's going to happen in the future, but you can see what's likely to happen.
Yes.
You can see possible, probable futures, and some of the futures are super probable, and you can actually make a confident prediction. Like that Trump would win for example, that Trump would win the election. That was so probable by virtue of what the transits were to his chart versus what the transits were to Hillary Clinton's chart. It was so probable to my eyes that Trump was going to win, even though I didn't want to believe it, didn't want to say it, right? But it was just so probable that he was going to win that you can make a confident prediction. Like, he's going to win. That's my prediction. But it's never 100% one thing or the other. There's too many variables involved in producing the future, some of which cannot be determined, some of which are just eternally variable, like the person's will.
Right. Makes sense. Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome. So that doesn't mean that the future is totally unreadable, but it means that it's not totally unreadable. You can predict it, but it's a prediction. It's not a knowledge. It's not a knowledge of what the future is. It's a prediction of what the future is probably going to be.
I understand. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then tomorrow, first day of spring, we're going to move to liveliness and
birth.
Life. Yes.
New birth.
This was a death conversation.
Great.
After rebirth.
I have to think of a good title for this. Predicting death. A good title for our conversation. Which maybe
what is it going to be?
Predicting death.
Predicting death. Wow.
Yeah.
People will fall
for that. People will watch that, right?
Yes.
All right, great. Thanks,
Thank you. Thank you.
On behalf of us all, thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
See you next week.
Yes. Bye.